Alright, so it's time to revisit the characterization of some of the characters on the show. Starting with Cyborg in this episode, Only Human, in which Cyborg is forced to, through the strength of the human spirit, overcome the limits of his mechanical side. The episode opens on a pretty cool training sequence. All the Titans are practicing their various abilities. Cyborg is trying to lift this giant machine, which keeps increasing the weight upon him. But his capacitors get to 100%, and he's unable to lift any more weight and ends up failing to complete the training sequence. Even though everyone was standing there with him, encouraging him, he couldn't do it. And this forces him to admit to his friends, for the first time it seems, that because so much of him is mechanical, so much of him has built-in limiters that he just can't overcome, so he does have an upward limit. He ends up spending the rest of the day sulking, playing video games against some guy online called Atlas, and despite the failed attempts of all of his friends to cheer him up, which distract him from the game, he does beat this guy. But it turns out Atlas is a robotic, I don't know if he's like a super villain or if he's just like kind of a dickish neutral robot guy. I don't know anything about him actually, but he definitely seems kind of super villainy in this episode, so I'm just going to call him a robotic super villain who actually shows up after that to the tower to challenge Cyborg to an actual fight. Like, I don't know how he knew that Cyborg was someone who could stand up to him in the first place, like IRL, but it seems that he did and decided to challenge him. Cyborg and Atlas end up fighting 3 times over the course of this episode, but only 2 of them really matter. This first fight doesn't matter all that much. This is more of a plot device kind of fight. Atlas shows up. It's a very impromptu fight, no rules. Both of them are using weapons against each other, and it ends with the other Titans getting involved and Atlas capturing them in these spherical force fields as he puts it, trophies. But instead, it's clear that he just intends to use them as leverage to get Cyborg to fight him in a more fair fight with rules that Atlas has set. No weapons, just a knockout, drag-down brawl. The spectacle around the next couple of fights between Atlas and Cyborg in this episode are framed like boxing matches or wrestling matches, but they're treated like superhero, supervillain fights. The first fight, Atlas wins. He grapples with Cyborg, and Cyborg pushes back the same way he pushed back against the weight machine, but he reaches his 100%, and Atlas is just plain stronger than him. But even after Atlas wins, even though he said he would give the others back, he doesn't. So now Cyborg has a reason to come back stronger next time. Throughout all of this, Atlas has had this mechanic character following him around, a human with a hover pack that lets him fly around and get to Atlas whenever Atlas needs him. He maintains Atlas and helps him swap out his ammunition and reload his weapons when they're low. And he has a lot of respect for Atlas. He even seems to kind of like Atlas simply because Atlas is so strong and so capable a fighter. It's even kind of implied that maybe Atlas wasn't always such a dick, that maybe at some point he was more humble, but the fact that he's so great has made him what he is today. This high and mighty jerk who just doesn't care about the people around him anymore. He certainly doesn't care about the mechanic, and Robin sees that and uses that to engage in some psychological warfare, eventually convincing the mechanic to turn on Atlas. So by the time Cyborg shows up again to save his friends, and is using weapons at first to ensure that he's able to free them, Atlas wants to use his weapons too, but the mechanic won't give him his weapons. And Atlas has, I guess, upgraded himself so much at this point that he doesn't recognize how to change his own weapons anymore. He's left unarmed against Cyborg, and he seems afraid. Fitting in pretty well with something that Robin said earlier, that Atlas recognizes that without the mechanic, he'd be nothing, and is afraid of that. That he's actually afraid of the mechanic, and that's why he treats him so badly, because he doesn't want the mechanic to have any power over him. But Cyborg still wants to defeat Atlas in a fair fight, so he forgoes using his weapons for the rest of this final confrontation, and the other Titans stand by to referee. And when it really comes down to it, when Cyborg really has something to fight for, he's able to find the strength to activate the spell card limiter removal, doubling his attack points. And because he's only half robot, the secondary effect doesn't even destroy him at the end of the turn. This joke went a little too far. I'm going to stop now. Point is, he's able to overcome his limits and defeat Atlas, and he does ascribe this to his human half, which is why I mentioned earlier this is a human spirit triumphs over the machine story. It's basically, what was that folk character? John Henry. It's basically a John Henry story, but all of the conflict is internal. And the human spirit overcoming the literal limits in a machine is just the right kind of cheesy for me. It's just the right kind of cheesy that I eat right up. But let's explore this logically for a second. First of all, it's possible that Cyborg's systems are just more adaptable than he thinks they are. After all, we did see in the season premiere this season that Cyborg does have an issue where his self-pity gets in the way of him realizing what he's capable of. He thought, in that alternate future that he was unable to leave the tower because he couldn't upgrade himself to the point where he could sustain his power any further. And yet, in less than a day, he was able to do that, presumably because his technology was more adaptable than he realized it was. Maybe this is just another case of that just happening much earlier because of the changes made when Starfire reintroduced herself into the present timeline. This means that this present version of Cyborg is already stronger than that future Cyborg ever got. There's also other things that he could do that he's just not looking at. Maybe he could upgrade himself, something that we know that Cyborg does. Like, he upgrades the technology at his disposal all the time, because, like, he upgrades the T-car and stuff. Like, I'm trying to think of a specific instance of him upgrading himself in the show, and I can't think of any, but I'm sure he could if he wanted to. There's also tactics. He could start employing tactics, using his speed to his benefit along with his strength, rather than facing enemies head-on like he tends to do. That could be his giving 110%, if he's literally incapable of giving more than 100% in his body, which, I mean, he still is. This is just his new 100%. But you get what I mean. Maybe his giving 110% should have been him using tactics against Atlas instead of fighting him directly. But then again, this works as an effective visual metaphor for something like that, for him finding a new way to give more than 100%. So it still works either way, and it works on multiple levels, and it fits with Cyborg's character arc. I've said this before, but Cyborg doesn't care that he's a cyborg. Like, I'm sure he'd rather look human again if he could, but he still appreciates who he is and the power that he has and the ability to do good with it. He's just kinda self-pitying. He looks at himself sometimes and realizes that he may never be more than this again, and that does get to him. But episodes like this every now and then to remind him that he can be more than he is, he just has to look at things in a different way, are nice. They help to further his characterization without really going overboard and turning him into a dark, depressed character, which just wouldn't be fun and wouldn't be in character with this version of Cyborg. Maybe some of the comic book versions of Cyborg, but not this one. This Cyborg, 9 out of 10 times, he loves who he is. And this episode reinforces that while still allowing him that one time out of 10 to question who he is and what he can accomplish. It's a good, simple little episode, and I like it a lot. I only wish I could have found a better quality version of it, because the screen cap I have for this review, the cover of this review, is just terrible. I apologize for that. All of that said though, guys, if you have seen Only Human, what do you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.